Welcome to the Be a Brilliant Human podcast. You're in the right place if you're a growth-seeking being who acknowledges the challenges and delights of your humanity on the path to an ever more conscious life. If you want to feel inspired to love and accept yourself, to feel free to be and express you in all your brilliance, if you want to truly value yourself and others and feel energized and alive both at home and in the world, then sit back and take a breath as you explore and grow the brilliance of your beautiful human self with your host, the father of non-personal awareness and creator of the MPA process, Joel Young.
Hello, and welcome to the Be a Brilliant Human podcast. This is episode 44 with me, Joel Young. And in this episode, we're looking at a major symptom and cause of self-doubt and how you can turn that around to self-confidence. And I don't know about you, but if you're someone who suffered from chronic self-doubt, I know that's been me historically, you'll know how excruciating that can be. So you're in the right place today. We're going to look at that topic and unpack it somewhat, give you some insight and some practical guidance on how to do that shift. And but before we get into that, just to remind you that there are some great tools on offer. We cover a lot of tools here on this podcast, but not least of which is the MPA process, which you can get for free, by the way, if you're new. Hello. You might be going, what's MPA? MPA stands for non-personal awareness, and it's really a simple way to stop taking things personally and so much more. It's about letting go of the yucky stuff and letting in the yummy stuff in a really effortless way. And if you're any kind of coach or therapist or practitioner or work with one-to-one or work one-to-one with people in any way, I often describe MPA as the effortless way. And as you engage in the trainings with MPA, you'll discover the possibility of having no resistant clients. Yes, that's right. Never have a resistant client again, because embedded into those trainings is the secret sauce to letting whatever is presented by the client become a flowing, magical experience. So you can get that for free, the MPA process sheet, either via the show notes for today's podcast, which will be www.beabrillianthuman.com/44, or you can get those and other tools at my MPA website, which is Joel Young, my name, NPA, and MPA is November Papa Alpha.com. Just go there and you can get access to tools, which, by the way, reminds me that we've also got Boundary Bootcamp coming up. It ran last year. We're launching again this year very soon. Boundary Bootcamp is a place where you can go from having poor boundaries, and we're going to talk a bit about that today, to having healthy boundaries, because self-doubt in a way is at the crux of boundary issues. And so if you want to get in on that, and certainly be notified, because the way it's happening this year is I'm going to do a big launch with an insane offer, and then it will be available. I'm not going to take it off the market, so to speak, but it will go back to the full price and won't have the special deal. So if you want to make sure that you don't miss out on that, again, go to the show notes for today or to joelyoungmpa.com, and you'll find a link there to sign up for the Boundary Bootcamp waitlist, so you make sure you don't miss out. So today, I entitled it, am I resistant or decided? And that's because this week I was literally asked that question in a one-to-one session with a client. And I thought, you know what, that is a question that I may not hear it in those exact words, but I hear it a lot from clients and people I'm around. And it really points to something which is, I guess, something which I hear a lot. I can see where that comes from. And also I can see how it's kind of a really insidious expression of that self-doubt and some things that get in our way from really being and experiencing ourselves for who we are. So we're going to unpack that, get into that. Remember, by the way, I've got to say to subscribe if you like what you hear. If you're brand new, you wait till the end. If you like it, subscribe. If you're back again, subscribe if you haven't already. Hit that button wherever you are listening to this. But let's get into this topic. I think it's a really, really good topic. And I hope that it'll give you some ahas, some insights, some, oh my God, I do that. And oh my God, how amazing to change it. So let's dive into it right away. So let me give you a little bit of context for where that question came from. In this particular case, um, my client was in a situation where she was looking at the question of whether she should leave a group or not, which she was experiencing or had experienced for some time as being toxic for her. And it's really interesting because the question itself pointed to that inner conflict that we had. But what it felt like was the decision was already made, but that part of the question, am I just resistant, points to one of the things that we're going to talk about in detail here today, and that sort of sponsoring idea that implants that self-doubt and creates the conflict, denies the decision that's there. I mean, in essence, to give you in a nutshell how we worked it through, it's basically, the answer, it's just a story in the way. But that's simple to say, and then you've got to kind of wrangle it through. But I mean, who asks this kind of question? Again, it might not be language exactly the same way, but in my experience, one of the main groups of people that I see this kind of questioning in is people on the awakened path, the spiritual path, the personal development path. So those are the sort of people that sort of have this habit or have this thing. We'll get into why in a moment, that is. And then there's just general self-doubters, people who have just a sense of self-doubt in their own decision-making, in their own validity, really. And these are people who have poor boundaries. I mean, what I'm describing here is definitely a symptom of poor boundaries. And in a way, what we're doing here is we're looking for some kind of metric outside of ourselves that gives us permission or validation or confirmation of what we already know, but we have that doubt that comes in. In a sense, what's happening is our instincts are being overridden by some kind of story or some dogma. I like to call it dogma because often we haven't investigated and it's just some rote idea. So let's talk about, say, the spiritual dogma. So if I give you a context, so for her, it was about leaving a toxic group and, do I leave or do I stay? But there's lots of situations where I've certainly had experiences in my life where, certainly in relationships where I've gone, my gut saying, you need to go. And then there's all that spiritual dogma. Well, maybe I just need to learn my lessons. Maybe it's just a mirror of me and it's really my fault. And when I change, she'll change, so it's not about leaving. It's about doing the work on myself. It's just my stuff. Now, these are the kind of spiritual personal development dogmas that can implant themselves in a way that just inhibits honoring that deep inner knowing and just your own feelings. And even beyond the sort of the spiritual person development world, just in the cultural dogma, you get things like, well, who do I think I am having that opinion? Who am I to leave this group to think it's bad for me? Or it could be sort of, I'm being selfish or difficult if I stand up for my feelings or stand behind my decision. Basically, it's what we're doing here is we're self-gaslighting. The gaslighting, if you don't know, is a term used for sort of narcissistic behavior. It comes from a film back in about 1948. I think it was called Fanny by Gaslight. I can't remember now off the top of my head. But it's basically a guy goes around the house turning down the gas lights. And his wife goes, "Are they turned down?" He goes, "No, you must be mad." Completely invalidating your experience. And she kind of does go mad. And that's what happens when you're gaslighted. It makes you question your own experience. It questions you question your own reality. You certainly question your own authority. But in a way, when we take it on, what happens over time, if we've come to learn to that our feelings and our opinions and our preferences and our certainties aren't valid, we internalize that gaslighting. It's an invalidation of our own feelings, really. I mean, at the root of it, ultimately, it really is about a questioning of your own authority. It's like somewhere along the way you've got the message that it's not okay to trust your own instincts and your own feelings and preferences and all those things I just mentioned, which ultimately comes down to, it's not okay to be myself. Now, this is why I said at the beginning of this, because I know from my own experience, this is an excruciating place, this constant self-doubt. And one of the things that I think is a myth around this is that we don't have that certainty. I think that we all actually know the truth deep down inside. That's why I say it's about inserting a story. I think of it as like a path interrupt. So in a healthy situation, the path is, your feelings, you have a feeling of certainty around something, you know what you want, what works for you, you know what doesn't. There's that inner connection that just knows the truth of it. It's a knowing from which springs an action, a self-caring action, something which supports you and stands in who you are. But the path interrupt is that story, the inherited dogma, the ideas, the cultural pressures. So what happens then? Well, you have your feeling of certainty, and then boom, the story pops up like like the ultimate seductress. No, my darling, you must be wrong. And you bite, and it creates the doubt. That's the thing. It puts the doubt in your mind. And from that doubt, you can go into a state of paralysis and inaction, which can turn into a complete U-turn, into total self-denial, which then can spin off into, we're wonderful at rationalizing these things. We rationalize it to ourselves. I've done it in previous relationships where I stay when I should have gone, but that rationalization is pretty darn good, full of confirmation bias about why it's the right decision, even though that inner knowing is screaming, no. We do it. That's self-denial. And that's going to set up, further sort of mistrust of yourself and further self-doubt. So it's like ever decreasing circles. It's a spiral of affirming again and again that your authority is not valid. Your knowing of what you like, what you don't like, what works and what doesn't, is not valid. You're wrong. Your experience is wrong, and you should question yourself. And by the way, here's all of the spiritual ideas of why it's really about you not doing your work, or the cultural ideas of you're being awkward or selfish or inconvenient or just not right in some way. So we question ourselves in that way. And because it's about feeling, the way that I define healthy boundaries, the simple way is that it's about knowing what you feel and acting accordingly, or stating it accordingly. So in a sense, these are sort of boundary issues. So what do you do about it? You're in this perpetual cycle. Chances are, if you subscribe to what I said, somewhere inside you know it. You know that you know, and yet somehow you get hooked back in again and again to some story. It isn't just one story, by the way. It'll be a different story for different situations. But you probably have, several favorites, your go-to self-seduction, gaslighting stories. And there's all sorts of, comforts and things, sort of secondary comforts that happen where it feels safer not to actually step into your boundaries. And in fact, in Boundary Bootcamp, this is something we look at in great detail about, how your instincts, your feelings are all entangled in knots with the stories you've got. And we get a chance to really untangle all of that. So you can get clear and stand in your boundaries. But let's look a little bit at what do you do about this? Where do you go from here? If you recognize, oh my God, yes, I definitely do that. What do you do from there? Okay, so I've got good news and bad news in terms of what to do with this. The good news is it's pretty straightforward. What needs to happen is pretty straightforward, and I'll lay it out for you. The bad news, I guess, is that, it's one of those easier said than done things. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible or even has to be that hard. It just takes work to do it. It needs your conscious intention, your effort, your commitment to really bust this cycle. So what is it? What do you have to do? Well, it starts with self-awareness. You need to just really acknowledge to yourself that this is happening. And you can pick a certain situation to do it with. In this situation, that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm seducing myself away from my own authority and causing myself a lot of pain, going into paralysis, U-turn, capitulating on my boundaries, all of those kind of things. But it starts with, getting clear on this is what's happening. And again, easy said, and even easy to say, oh, yeah, I can do that. But you can say, yeah, I can do that. But I'm talking about really, really, really acknowledging what's going on and the pain that it causes. Because if you don't really acknowledge the pain that it's causing you, you can just go, yeah, but it's kind of okay, which is another self-denial, another invalidation of your experience, puts you back in the cycle, and off you go again. You just got nowhere. You just paid lip service to the idea. So once you acknowledge it, you need to find, what's that interrupt? What's that path interrupt? What's the story? What's the dogma? What is it that is hooking you into, or hooking you away really from your sort of yourself, from your knowing? And you need to do some work to really bust that story. And there's loads of different ways you can do that. We certainly cover lots of ways to do that in Boundary Bootcamp. But it really is, you've got to look that in the eye, see the lie of it. It can, sometimes it needs you to see where it came from, but not always. It really is simply about busting the myth of that story. Because then you can shift it and start to act in a different way, to act on the new realization, which begins that building of self-trust. Because if this has been an ongoing thing, probably for most of your life, then there's a big tank of mistrust of yourself. So that's why it's such a, anyone who steps into this kind of work, anyone who comes to Boundary Bootcamp, I'm like, man, I bow down to you, because it really does take that acknowledgement that I'm facing a lifetime of history and self-mistrust. And if you think about coming to Boundary Bootcamp, there's an investment of money, there's an investment of time. That's a risk. And it feels like more of a risk because maybe in the past you've done these things and not followed through. So I really get that is there. I really get that there's this sense of not even trusting yourself to move forward. That's why I made Boundary Bootcamp in a way which was, really step by step, easy, kind of lots of encouragement to really go one step at a time and really unpick it piece by piece, because every step of the way we're looking to practice the art of following through on the validating our own experience, because through that practice, you put more into the tank of self-trust. And that is an amazing thing. That is what is kind of the medicine that is required, in that way. And again, it's set up in Boundary Bootcamp that you look at a few certain specific boundary situations. And again, I'm talking about boundaries because ultimately any self-doubt is about not honoring and trusting your own feelings, and that links directly to boundaries. But the thing is, each different situation, you could look at a specific situation and work through it. It's not just about, oh, well, that's that one done, and it's a brand new start for something else. Because every time you work through a situation, you are revealing the patterns that are probably common to or the several patterns that are probably common to all the situations where you seduce yourself into self-doubt, capitulate on what you really feel, invalidate yourself, gaslight yourself, all of these different things. And each time you do it, you put more trust in that tank, which is a deeply amazing thing. So, I mean, and that's a pretty simple, basic path. But again, I really acknowledge that that you need support. And in fact, that's part of why, because of my own experience. And if you've seen any of the Boundary Bootcamp stuff that I put out to talk about it, that I say I was a master of shitty boundaries, terrible boundaries. And so I know what it took me to go through it. And part of why I set up Boundary Bootcamp and I had such passion about it is because I recognize what a challenge it is. So in it, you get given the tools to take you through that process. So you go to healthy boundaries. which means, you get to connect with your instincts and your feelings. There's actually a whole section on instinct and feelings within the Boundary Boot Camp, because I think it's an area that we look at in therapeutically a lot. Not so much instincts. I think instincts are the forgotten guidance tool within us. They are intrinsically linked, but we look at survival strategies and how they can all get really tangled up. In fact, week 2 of Boundary Boot Camp is called Untangling the Knots. So that means that you can learn to discern, resistance from your truth. Because in this, I don't want to imply that there is never the resistance, because we can have situations where we, it is, more in our interest to stand and do the work on ourselves, to do the stuff. So in a sense, some of those spiritual dogmas that I've mentioned, there's a kernel of truth in them, but it's where the context gets lost. That's why I call it dogma, because if the context gets lost, they get sort of plastered over every situation, and the medicine becomes the poison. But as you go through Boundary Boot Camp, you get the tools, the practice. You get to untangle, all of the knots within your instincts and feelings, so you can begin to discern what is resistance from your truth. And which ultimately, and this is what you come to as you go through to week 3 in particular, you get to really step into, I am the sole authority when it comes to determining what works and what doesn't work for me, which is the essence of a boundary. So your decisions, become clearer to you. You don't have that question. Or if the question comes up, you go, nah, no, I know my truth. And again, when you are clear in yourself, one thing, and we do cover this again in Boundary Boot Camp, is the communication. Your communication becomes clearer, and again, I want to make a distinction here, because it's not about just clever words. Communication is as much about your own congruency as it is about the language. I don't know if you've had this situation. I certainly have, where, you can language it very cleverly and you feel kind of like you're stepping into that boundary and you say it strongly, only to capitulate. And the other person knows, because you're not fully connected. You haven't done the work, which we do this in week 3, of really building in yourself that sense of connection, that congruency, so you can step fully into the knowing of your own authority, the clarity in your own decision. And when you are clear and you communicate clearer, you end up with cleaner relational interactions. And by cleaner, I mean not all that foggy, passive, unclear, maybe, lack of clarity. And I think I said this in last week's podcast. When you're around someone who has clear, congruent communication, it's so easy to just be around them, because everybody's clear, which is, just a really beautiful thing. And we're talking here about the sort of positive spiral. The downward spiral is you're seduced into self-doubt, you go into paralysis, inaction, U-turn, self-denial, further resistance. Well, as you follow this path, it's going to give you more energy. Why? Because that old path takes a lot of energy to maintain. Keeping your essence down takes a remarkable amount of energy. So it can show up as, depression, tiredness, lackluster, what's the point of life, or just whatevs, or just doing the do and settling and all those things. All your energy is tied up in keeping that truth down. So, and of course, as I said, you'll build more self-trust. That's part of the thing. You'll definitely feel more empowered. You start to become more you, in a sense. In a way, it's more honest. When you're clear in, what works, what doesn't, what feels good and what doesn't, and you can clearly and congruently communicate that, you actually, in a way, discover yourself. I mean, part of the process of Boundary Boot Camp, in a sense, is self-discovery. And like if you've been on this self-doubt, self-invalidation path for any length of time, you're probably not really clear on who you are. Not really. And as you step into it, because I think we get to discover who we are by stepping into our experiences. It's not about right or wrong or success or failure. It's just by stepping into and behind our own decisions, our own preferences, our own feelings, we get to evolve more congruently in who we are. So you'll be more you. And in fact, it's that which is an expression of more confidence as well. I did title this, I think, having more confidence, stepping into self-confidence. But this is what it looks like, knowing who you are. And I think another piece of the equation that comes in here, and I think it's part of, in say the conditioning through childhood, one of the reasons we fall for these sort of inner seductions or outer seductions of dogma, is there's a sense that, I don't matter. So when you do the work, you really start to get it. Yeah, I matter. What matters to me matters, which means you can actually become more visible, because when you know that you matter and you're expressing that not only in clear communication, but energetically, you literally become more visible. I don't know if you've had this experience, if you're someone who's done the self-doubt thing and all of the stuff that I've talked about. I know when I was a kid, I felt like the invisible boy. I'd be in a group of friends in a circle, and everyone would be putting their opinions in. I'd express my opinion, and the conversation would move on without even acknowledging that I'd even said anything. And I'd be like, hello, did anybody hear me? And what's happening there is I didn't matter. That was what my energy was saying. So my words didn't have any weight. And so they were, they didn't land with anybody. And it wasn't that what I was saying was nonsense. It's just that energetically there was no power behind them, because there was a sense of I didn't matter. So other people respond, really, really well. So to kind of recap it then, what you need to do is first of all, you've got to acknowledge it. Then you've got to do something about it, which is sign up for Boundary Bootcamp. That's a really great way to do it. But however you do it, you can find what the interrupting path is, what the interrupting story is, what that dogma is, and bust the myth of it. And then the other thing is as you do that, you can't just do it and then do nothing. And a big part of Boundary Bootcamp is what I call the rehearsal section, where, I encourage you to rehearse your new experience, because that rehearsal, that practice, and in week 4, where we look at how you take those new healthy boundaries out into the world, how to meet resistance, how to deal with the inevitable manipulations from those who would like you to not have strong boundaries because it's bloody inconvenient for them. That takes practice. So you're going to need to practice your new stance once you fully embedded it in. So I hope that's given you some good insight. I would so love you to come to Boundary Bootcamp when I launch it very, very soon. As I said at the top of the program, when I launch this time, I'm going to launch with an insane offer. You don't want to miss that. If this is resonating with you, now is going to be the time. So go sign up onto the wait list. If you're listening to this in a few weeks, it may be that it's live already. The links will take you to the live page. So, but if you don't want to miss that period where you can get it for this insane offer, then sign up to the Boundary Bootcamp waitlist, which you can find. The actual URL is thempaacademy.com/boundary-bootcamp. But you can find it through the show notes today, www.beabrillianthuman.com/44. or on the joelyoungmpa.com website. Go and do that. If any of this resonates with you, I tell you, I want you in there. I can't almost find words. I'm tripping over my words with passion, because I know what a profound and massive difference doing this work, rolling up your sleeves, going through this process can make to your life. If you've got boundary issues, if you've got self-doubt issues, a lack of confidence, all of these things, then when you come into this state, stepping into the world, your life is going to change. And that may sound scary, but good. If you're up for it, change of that nature where it's going to transform your life. It should be scary, my friend. It's big. So if you listen to what I say about it and you go, oh, I don't know, it's for you. So go sign up to the waitlist. I'm banging on now. I'm going to leave you to it. That's it for this week. Remember to hit that subscribe button. If you like what you've heard today, then go and tell someone about it. You can use the show notes link to share it on social media if you'd like to do that. I think boundaries and self-doubt and these topics are really important, and certainly, from the feedback I've got from people over these recent episodes where I've been talking a lot more about boundaries, is this is a topic which is so needed, and I do feel it's so needed. So even if it doesn't resonate with you, or you find, oh, my boundaries are fine, maybe there's people that that you can recognize suffer from poor boundaries. Do themselves a kindness. If you think this is valuable, tell them, send it to them, share it, and all that lovely stuff. Otherwise, I will see you next week, and all that remains is to cue the moo.